coming to you from sunny Denver, Colorado. Get ready for your weekly dose of unscripted conversation all about the housing industry in the Centennial State. Although their specialty is in mortgages, in this show they are transcending lending. And now, your host, the most unconventional guys in conventional lending, the Mortgage In-Laws.
All right, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Brent Blankenberg, and without my counterpart today, Dylan Herrera. His wife actually went into labor this morning, which is also my sister. But the show must go on. We've got someone here I was really excited to talk to, so wanted to continue with the show. So our guest today is Michael Warren, and he is a development manager at Metropolitan Residential Advisors. How's it going, Michael?
It's going good, thanks.
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So I want to start off because development manager is a job title I know I haven't heard of or come across very often. So what do you do as a development manager?
So the development manager title, I think, can vary pretty widely between different development organizations. My role specifically with Metropolitan Residential Advisors is to identify new opportunities, do all of the financial underwriting, the analysis, and feasibility, and then to do the entitlement portion as well. So working with the municipalities, the cities, getting it zoned, permits approved, working with the planning department in that sense, and then transitioning over, working with a general contractor, handing it over to them while they actually build it out.
So you're really involved with the whole thing, start to finish.
Yeah, pretty much start to finish. I think my role specifically, I've delegated some of the construction management piece to some other members of our team. Traditionally, in a lot of larger development companies, a development manager will actually continue to handle the construction management piece. But just the way that we set it up, we like to kind of segment out the business a little bit more and focus in individual areas. So again, I kind of handle the front end stuff a little bit more and help through the transition and passing it over to our construction team. But other development managers you will see actually handle everything from the initiation of the site, the project, all the way through to completion.
Okay. What is your support staff or people you have supporting you, what does that look like in the early stages of finding new deals and the early stage before it goes to construction?
Yeah, so again, I'll speak to us specifically, but it will range, it'll vary pretty widely. So with us, I work hand in hand with our CEO and the owner of our company. I'm out there knocking on doors, working with brokers, establishing relationships with municipalities, really trying to find any opportunity however I can. I'll bring that opportunity back, do a little bit of initial financial underwriting, feasibility analysis to see what we can do, and then I present that to the owner of our company, the CEO, and I have a development associate who works with me now, and then we have a couple of other people in the office as far as admin. They do a little bit of market research, due diligence stuff, and then once we make a decision if we want to continue to pursue, that's when we will engage our legal team. That's when we will engage our subs, our contractors, our other trade departments, so an architect, an engineer, a land planner, all of those different groups to help us really put together the final concept. And then as we move forward through the acquisition, then we engage the general contractor, get more finalized numbers for our pricing, and hopefully build it out with success.
Gotcha. So you say you actually do the early on underwriting type of role yourself?
Yeah.
So in my world, in the residential mortgage world, underwriting, is basically we send the file on, the complete file to the underwriter. You would know this, but and the underwriter is basically looking through all the documentation we provided, making sure that this deal fits in the guidelines, and if so, that we've given them all the documentation we need. Most of the time, not everything's in there, so then the underwriter will come back and say we need further documentation to close this loan, but it does look like a good transaction. So underwriting in your world is going to look different than that. When you say underwriting, I don't know exactly what you mean. So what does that piece look like?
Sure. So underwriting, it is a little bit different than what you would typically see in the lending world. The underwriting is really more so putting together a financial model, incorporating all of the different costs associated with the development, and that's going to include all of your hard costs, all of your soft costs, any other owner's costs, variables, contingencies, all of that stuff. It's also going to be dependent on what type of product you are developing. So if it is a for rent product, you have to go through, do a market feasibility analysis on what the property could command in rents, and you incorporate that into the financial model. That helps you determine what your net operating income would be, and that goes both for residential and commercial. If it is a for sale product, you do a very similar analysis on what comps within that neighborhood that product type are selling for, what you estimate your product could sell for. You incorporate that into the financial model. That gives you your revenue, your income. Then you base that off of your costs to actually build out the project, and that generates what types of returns the project will produce. And there's all sorts of different returns that different investors like to speak to. IRR, cash on cash, return on cost. So we incorporate all of those different return analysis into our financial model so that we can produce that to a potential equity partner and to a lender, a financing institution, so that they know that we have underwritten the deal accordingly. Then that's our underwriting for the feasibility of the project. We actually take that financial model and turn it over to a bank or a lender. And much like underwriting for a single family home, they do a similar analysis. However, the biggest difference is that they are underwriting the revenue generated from the project as opposed to just qualifying the borrower. So there is a big component to qualify the borrower and the equity partners within the deal. There's really two kinds of different loans in the sense of recourse, and non-recourse. So recourse meaning that somebody would have to sign a personal guarantee. They are personally liable for if the project goes south, then they basically are going to be the ones that have to pony up and make sure that they make the project solvent. Non-recourse basically means nobody's on the hook. If the project goes south, they can just walk away from the deal. Obviously, those are a little bit more expensive as far as rate, cost, terms. But yeah, so the financial underwriter will go through, they will underwrite the personal borrowers, but then they go back through and they put a little bit more weight and emphasis on underwriting the quality of the project based on the revenue or the net operating income that project will produce. And that's actually typically what they base their loan amounts off of. So in residential lending, you'll get a loan based off of your income that you produce as a borrower. In development and in the construction world, you get your loan based off of what the revenue of the project will be.
Okay. Wow, so it sounds like you're spanning across a whole bunch of different activities there. You're up front, you're building relationships with municipalities, brokers, finding opportunities, and then you get into the attention to detail and having to know your numbers and investments, which is a whole different side. And then you're also doing the role of coordinating once you take it, to market, and you've actually got builders you're coordinating with, and you have to have a thorough understanding of construction. So obviously you didn't just graduate college having no information and jump right into this role. So how do you find yourself in this position where you're so capable and qualified of handling all these different roles in the transaction? What's your background?
Great question. Yeah, great question. I appreciate the flattery. I like to think I'm qualified, but I still learn every day. So, my history, I went to school at University of Colorado, and I actually went through a real estate program there.
What's that program like?
The program actually, it was really more of a good crash course introduction to real estate, kind of gets you familiar with a lot of the terminology, a lot of the real estate law, some of the financing aspects of it, but very generalized, very preliminary kind of real estate 101 stuff.
So they talk about residential and commercial, or is it more?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So they'll touch on a little bit of that. You can definitely steer your focus in one direction or the other. But they do like to be a little bit more generalized. At least they did when I went through the program.
Okay.
So then actually I moved out to California, and I started working for a commercial real estate research and information company called CoStar. And CoStar has since grown exponentially. They've made a number of mergers and acquisitions. LoopNet is a commercial MLS provider that they acquired. You see all these funnyapartment.com commercials with Jeff Goldblum now. So that is CoStar as well. But I worked in their research and analytics department, and I worked actually in the Pacific Northwest region, and it was really working with brokers, building owners, other real estate professionals, collecting information, data on projects, everything from ground raw land all the way up to completed high-rise $100 million projects. So that was a good introduction into the space for me, but quickly realized that wasn't long-term opportunity for me. So and I'll take a quick step back. I had really always kind of wanted to be in development, but I realized quickly that there were so many different facets of the industry that I needed to learn. So that was really my approach, was to try and learn all of these different facets individually so that I could at one point take on the development role. So after CoStar, I went into brokerage, and I actually worked in the commercial financing. We had established a direct lender relationship with a lender out of Colorado, and so we did loans all across the country. And then I did that for a few years, and then the world turned upside down. Financial crisis came along, and I had a really good opportunity. I went and worked with a couple of guys who had a startup company in the default management world. And they, right time, right place, both guys incredibly smart, incredibly ambitious, and essentially we were some of the first outsourcers for Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Chase, Bank of America, all of the big lending institutions during the downturn. And at the peak of that downturn, we were actually selling about 15,000 homes a month. So it was a sheer volume business, but a ton of exposure. We got to see a little bit of everything. We were dealing with all sorts of different municipalities, cities, states, laws, regulations, not to mention all of the different restrictions and regulations that went along with all of the institutional clients. So I worked with them for about 6 years. We had a ton of success, and then as the market started to recover, decided that was really my opportunity to get into development. So at that point, I had started interviewing with the company that I'm currently with, Metropolitan Homes, Metropolitan Residential Advisors. I actually interviewed with them for quite a while before I decided to take the position, and I've been with them now for about 3 years. And again, like I said, I learn something new every day. So just try and take the approach that every opportunity is an opportunity to learn, and the only failure is really a failure that you can't learn a lesson from. So we've definitely had some ups and downs, and we've had some bumps and bruises along the way. But I think that's really inevitable, and especially in real estate, markets are always evolving, markets are always changing. So it's really hard to have your finger on the pulse of all of these different aspects that we just went over. The construction market, the labor market, cost of materials, not to mention rents or for sale product, legal litigation issues, all of those different things. There's just so many different components that you have to really have an open mind, and you really need to have some good mentors, some people that you can rely on that have been there in the past and that are willing to share and help you grow in your role. So I've been very fortunate to have a couple of really, really valuable, great mentors, and I think that has definitely been a huge contribution to help me get to where I am today.
So it sounds like it was a really conscious decision that you made at some point in time of wanting to have these different experiences, because that's the only way to get into development. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah. As funny as it sounds, or maybe even as cliche as it sounds, when I was in high school, I read the first book by by Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And, at that point in my life, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but the book and the concepts behind it just really made a lot of sense to me. So that's what steered me into the real estate direction with University of Colorado, and then just exploring different opportunities there. I found that the most appealing, the most attractive to me was really the development side. You get to be creative, you get to design, you get to create these neighborhoods, these communities, and that's really what steered me there. So then taking a step back and how do I get there, I realized, like I said, that there were just so many different components, and you can't just dive in and try and pick them all up along the way. You need to learn them individually, kind of become more of an expert on each individual side, and then take all of that experience, become a more well-rounded position.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of my questions was going to be, what advice would you give to someone who wants to get into development? But it sounds like, just life experience, which I love that. I mean, before I got into mortgage, I was kind of in a place where I didn't know where I wanted to go exactly, but I knew that experiences were the most beneficial things, just different, varied kinds of experiences. So I love when people are doing jobs, to gain experience. And there's something really pure about that, as opposed to just trying to make money off doing that job, just going in and punching a clock, but instead going there because you're soaking in this information that's invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned creating communities and neighborhoods, is something you were excited to get into. And I did want to mention how we originally met, which I think was a pretty funny story. So in my house, we got a letter here, said that there was a neighborhood meeting coming up to discuss a potential development that was coming. And we actually already have a development. There's 7 houses being built catty corner to my house, and Michael's the one that's handling that development. So I actually thought the meeting was about that, and I was thinking, why are they having a meeting so late in the process? These houses are already, almost mostly built. But so we went to the meeting over here at the rec center, and it was such an interesting experience for me. So Michael, we don't have video, but I don't know exactly how old Michael is, but he looks like a very young cat, real spring chicken. He could pass for maybe even late 20s. So young looking guy, and then you've got
that, but I appreciate that.
And then you've got this room full of people, many of which were older, and almost all of which were completely unhappy. A lot of the questions that were asked were very irrational. A lot of the comments that were made really didn't have anything to do with what you were presenting. But you kept your cool really well, and I laughed throughout the whole thing to myself, just because I was like, man, I wonder what percentage of this guy's job this is to hold these meetings to where you've got these angry people out there who honestly they don't really know what you're doing and why they're angry at you, but they're just mad because of change, and people don't like change. So what do you think about that particular part of your job, of where you're actually meeting with the communities that you're changing or building?
Yeah, so it's definitely a challenge, but it is a necessity. So typically when in the development space, if you want to rezone a property, if the current zoning doesn't allow you to build what you want to build, what you think is the right use for that property, you need to go through a rezone process. And the property that you're talking about specifically, it was zoned for industrial. It didn't allow for any industrial or any residential. So we had come up with a concept, a mixed-use concept, that would incorporate some flex warehouse office space with some residential above, and it would serve as a buffer or transition zone from the more intensive industrial site to the residential neighborhood. So the municipality actually requires that you hold a neighborhood meeting. Not every municipality does, but most of them do, especially in a rezone. And it varies greatly as to what the requirements are within holding that neighborhood meeting. You do for this municipality specifically, you have to mail out a letter to every property owner within 1,000 feet radius of the property. That's why you got that letter. You have to post the property with the sign, and then sometimes municipalities will actually post notice in the newspaper or other publications to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to come and attend and learn more about the development. I think it's an interesting opportunity because a lot of times people have their minds made up before they come, and they don't really know what you're proposing, but change is hard. Change is hard for anybody, and so there's typically a lot of emotion in those meetings, and that's really been something that has been more of a challenge for me coming in. I wasn't quite as aware of how involved developers really need to be within the community and taking feedback and consideration, and that was naive of me because I just didn't understand that piece of it. So it is a necessity. It is something I think that definitely should happen, and it should just be an engagement between the developer and the neighborhood so that there is some camaraderie, there's some good neighbors feelings there, that somebody's not just coming in trying to impose what they think is right, and they actually can take feedback and consideration from some of the neighbors and try and incorporate that into their project and make it a win-win and a success for everybody. I mean, the real goal of a successful development is to be successful within the development, but also to enhance the community and the neighborhood around. So neighborhood enhancement is really one of our key mantras. I mean, we don't walk into an opportunity without that being at the front of our mind. So there were some tough questions that were asked, and there always are. And again, a lot of those are coming from emotions, people that there's this uncertainty with change. And that's totally understandable. And so it's really our job to try and put those concerns at ease and make them feel comfortable and confident that what we're trying to do, what we are proposing, is actually going to be that enhancement to their neighborhood. So I've been at neighborhood meetings with 200 people. We've had people threaten to shoot us.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it can definitely be very emotional. But again, that engagement is definitely something that I think should take place. And just for those reasons, just so that you can try and make sure that everybody understands, those people that have an open mind, that this is really going to be a success, something positive for them, as opposed to whatever deteriorating site or empty vacant lot or probably a poor use old zoning that has been carried over that should be updated can be changed.
So how do you feel going into those meetings? What do you get butterflies going in?
Oh yeah, it's nerve-wracking because you really never know what the response is going to be. I mean, you kind of go in with an approach, a mindset that there's definitely going to be some opposition. The biggest challenge, I think, for me, or the learning curve, has been how do you try and maintain control of the meeting and keep the atmosphere to be a positive atmosphere so that it doesn't just turn into a lot of people voicing complaints and getting those emotions to turn more negative than what they already are. So it is concerning, but it is I get a little uncomfortable and nervous going in for sure, but you just got to make sure you know your stuff. You got to prepare for pretty much any question that you think could be asked. And a lot of that also comes with experience. So there are questions from, what the zoning use is, the height restrictions, the setback requirements, the market rents, for sale, for rent, construction timelines, all of those different things. And they're all really good questions. But it really kind of all boils down to, how is this going to impact the neighbors? So you want to make sure that you have a really good answer for that, something that they will agree with, hopefully agree with.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that you had answers to some of the questions that did come out, and I guess just the scope of the feasibility survey or the underwriting or whatever it is that you do initially, it really is all encompassing. I mean, one of the things that was surprising to me is when the question about traffic came up, and you had some response. I think it was that this development was going to create one extra car per minute on that intersection or something to that effect. To which a couple of respondents in the audience had really funny things to say about, oh, that's not true. Sometimes I can't even get out of my driveway right now. So then, then you have to bring them back in, and that's not what we're saying. We're saying in addition to what there currently is. So
yeah.
But I was surprised. I mean, I guess what you look at is, you look at traffic, you look at noise, there's so many areas that you look at when you're doing this original underwriting.
Yeah, and all valid concerns from neighbors, right? So, I mean, I think that the biggest, the most prevalent concerns that we are approached with are density, so the number of people that are going to be moving into this new development, what that adds to the population of the neighborhood, and then that translates to traffic, how much traffic is this going to be producing, and also parking. So is the site going to have sufficient parking for everybody to be able to park on the site and not on the street and not impact the neighborhood negatively that way? So we do a ton of research and spend a lot of time on those specific aspects, including all the other things, but we'll have a traffic impact study done. And so we become very familiar with traffic counts, existing traffic counts, new proposed traffic counts, what that really breaks down to, because traffic is one of those things where if we get a traffic impact study done and let's say we're going to add 100 units and they would say, okay, that's going to generate another 500 cars per day. That sounds like a big number, right? But what does that really break down to? And if you look at it on if during the peak AM or peak PM traffic hours, how many cars are going to be added to the road, right? Because it's not like 500 people or 500 cars will all come in and out of the site at the same time. So it's breaking it down to a level that everybody can understand and become more comfortable with. And same thing with parking. So how many cars are typically within, a one-bedroom residential unit? How many cars go with a two-bedroom or a three-bedroom unit? And it's household formation and the demographics and all of those different things that we spend a lot of time researching so that we can answer those questions intelligently.
So we've talked about what your job looks like from start to finish, kind of in theory or in general, but I think it might be a little bit easier to understand if we use this one as an example and kind of show. And now every development's going to look different. I understand that. But let's take this one and just kind of extrapolate that to what your job looks like. So go back to the very beginning of where your job starts here, of finding this building. How did you go about finding the building in the first place?
So this site actually was a combination of, doing some preliminary research on finding out who the property owner was, and then coincidentally I had met a broker who had represented the landowner previously. So he already had a relationship with him. So we worked with the broker and had a meeting set up with the property owner. We had some preliminary conversations where we told them what we were interested in doing and if there was an opportunity to sell, because the land was not listed. So he currently has 2 tenants that are occupying the property, and he really didn't have any motivation or intent to sell. So it took a little bit of time to get a concept put together so that he could understand really what we thought the value of the land was. So at that point, when he confirmed that he would be at least open to continuing the conversation, that's when we dove in and put together some initial concepts and land plans. After that, we were able to determine or ascertain what we thought the value of the property was so that we could make an offer. We typically, our process is we will send out a letter of intent which specifies what the terms of the contract will be. It gives us an exclusive right to negotiate those terms of the contract with the seller for a specified period of time. Then once we go through the LOI, get that executed, then we move to generating the contracts. That's when we really engage our legal team to put together the contracts. They negotiate with the seller's legal team. Once we get the contract executed, that's when we begin our due diligence. And so we will typically include a timeline for anywhere from 60 days to 180 days for due diligence. And in due diligence, some of the big key items that we have to get confirmation on is the soils. Here in Colorado, we have some expansive soils, so that has a direct impact on the construction, on the cost of construction, what your foundation types need to be, water depths, with the water table, and all of those things. So we get confirmation on what the soil type is and what we can actually build there. Then we go through and we do an environmental study. So we'll do a phase 1 where they'll go through, make sure that the site is clean, that there's no other big remediation requirements. And if there are, they'll recommend a phase 2 to be completed. So sometimes if there was a gas station formerly on the site and there's some underground storage tanks, anything that could potentially have contaminated the soil, all of that needs to be identified before we get through our due diligence. Then concurrently, we're also doing a lot of our market research to determine what we think that either if it's for sale or for rent, what that price point's going to be. And then we're also doing our demographic research concurrently so that we can see what the profile is of the person that we're trying to attract into this development, who we think is most likely to be able to move in and also be able to afford whatever the product is that we're looking to build. And so we will also have our civil engineer out there. They'll do some preliminary work. We'll do an ALTA survey, which basically identifies the boundaries of the property, whether or not there's any easements that run through it, any other issues with encroachments or other issues kind of surrounding the title. We'll have a title team obviously pull a preliminary title report. We'll do a full title review. They'll issue us a title commitment with any exceptions that we need to address. And so those are some of the big key items. Then we're also putting together a financial model, making sure that this deal still pencils. And
let me stop you real quick because I'm curious. At this stage in the process, do you have a pretty good idea of what you want the proposed development to look like, or what the building would be, whether it be mixed use, the amount of units? At this point, are you pretty set on that already? So that's really early on in the process?
Yeah, so when we are kind of in the LOI stage, that's when we'll put together our preliminary concept. And really through this due diligence period, it's more of a validation of making sure that the concept is the right concept, that there's no major revisions that need to be made. And there's always going to be a bunch of revisions, right? So we're going to change from maybe 100 units down to 80 units, or 10 single-family homes down to 7 single-family homes, or whatever that may be. But it's all still, it should be within that general initial concept, as long as we did our job correctly from the get-go.
Okay.
So it's more validation.
In this case, you had mentioned it's industrial, zoned industrial, and then it butts right up pretty much to residential. So was that the big determining factor in this case of why you all chose to go with mixed use?
Yeah, it was. And we also have been doing a lot of homework and research with this municipality's comprehensive plan, and they're currently in the process of updating the comprehensive plan. And so the comprehensive plan outlines the goals and objectives of the municipality, where they think the direction of the city should go. So within that, they have identified this area as a transitionary zone, and really an area of catalytic activity as they define it. And so what that means is really that they think that the current zoning is probably not the best zoning, that it does have a negative impact on that immediately adjacent residential zone district. So they would like to introduce some sort of transitionary product. So having that support, at least through the comprehensive plan, that also steered the direction of what we were originally intending to put there. So, that is also a big piece of this. You don't walk into a site not understanding what the zoning is, not understanding what the city or municipality requirements are for rezoning it, what the adjacent zonings are, all of those things. You're not going to walk into a residential neighborhood, buy a piece right in the middle, and say, I'm going to build a 15-story high-rise building. It's just not going to happen. So being familiar with all those different concepts and plans and pieces definitely have a big contributing factor to what direction you're going to take.
Do you find that most of the developments that you get into, or at least try to get into, are in more of transitional type of zones, of not strictly in residential?
Yeah, great question. I think, every development company is going to be different. We are a little bit more of a boutique development, so we don't like to compete with the really small guys or the really big institutional guys. We kind of found our niche to be right in the middle. So, while we do currently have a focus on some of this stuff that runs along these industrial corridors, we're also doing, townhomes and condos in very upscale neighborhoods, high luxury product. We've traditionally done a lot of luxury stuff, whether it be just single family detached or condos. So as far as specific product type, one of the things that our approach may be a little bit different is, if we see an opportunity, we will really spend a lot of time studying what we think the best use for that property would be, as opposed to imposing a product that we have already built, or that is kind of inside our box of something that we just enforce or impose on the site. So we try and cater it, be a little bit more customized, and that's really where I think development gives you a lot of freedom, flexibility to be creative. You get to spend a lot of time thinking what is going to be the most successful, not only for this specific site, but for the neighborhood and the surrounding community, and that's what you get to propose.
Okay. So I sidetracked you a little bit, but so you had mentioned with this one in specific, you've had your civil engineer go out there, you've done soil surveys, you've done environmental surveys, and now you're getting into the financials. So
Yep. So those being the big key pieces of our initial due diligence, and then once we get confirmation that we're clear to move forward with all that stuff, then we will go to the next step, which may be the entitlement piece. So for this property in particular, we had to do a rezone. So we had already initiated our entitlement piece with that. The first step was to have a neighborhood meeting. Then you go to a planning and zoning commission or a planning board, and then you go to either a city council or a board of county commissioners. The planning and zoning commission or planning board is a public hearing, and so is the city council or the board of county commissioners. Every municipality, every county is different as to how they process that, but with this specific property, that would have been the next steps. Typically, an entitlement for a rezone takes anywhere from 4 months to 18 months. So it can be a very lengthy, long, drawn-out process. When we put a property under contract, very rarely will we take the risk of purchasing the property and closing before the entitlements are approved. So we will typically incorporate some sort of timeline where we have this period of time to get those entitlements in place and approved, and then we set our closing date after that.
Okay.
So that's where we're in the middle of with that piece right now.
Yeah. Sounds like there are an awful lot of places that a deal can die on one of these.
Yes.
Every step of the way.
Every step of the way. And so it's been an interesting, one of my mentors actually gave me the best advice, where you walk into a deal and initially there's a lot of excitement and you're really trying to make the deal work. And he told me that you need to take a different approach. It needs to be, how can I kill this deal? Mm-hmm. And you need to try and punch holes in every single piece and basically validate all of these things. And if it all comes out clear in the end, then you move forward. But just like buying a home can be an emotional process, where if you get physically attached to something, you can make a little bit more of an irrational decision. Mm-hmm. Same thing with development. You need to make sure that it's your mindset and your approach is that it is a business decision. It needs to financially, economically be feasible, and then you can move forward, but don't get attached to it.
Yeah, that's good advice in all areas of life. So something tells me that you probably thoroughly enjoy the fact that you are doing so many different things throughout the process of your job and these developments, and that's probably a lot of why you got in, because I'm sure you might get bored or did get bored in previous job roles where you were doing just one thing. But do you have any part of the process that stands out to you as being far and away your favorite thing to do?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I definitely have the ADD, and I can get distracted, and so trying to stay focused has been something that I've been striving really hard to do well. But the piece that I enjoy most about this development is really the initial putting together the initial plan and concept, and some of the design and creativity that you get to have. And that translates through the process for quite a while. I mean, it's from putting together the initial concept of what is the product that you think is the best product there, spanning all the way through the architectural design of the exterior of the building, what the interior of the units or whatever the space is looks like, how that caters specifically to the end user, and then with real estate, it's an exciting time with all the technological advances, with all of these different concepts that are coming through, different ways of living. People are definitely living differently now than they did even 10, 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I think that the millennial generation is definitely kind of opening our eyes to that even more. But you see a lot of these micro units, people that have shared living spaces, shared working spaces, and retail is being totally transformed. So all of that, trying to keep up with those changes in the industry is exciting. It's always something new. So really that concept, the creation, the creativity that's in there, that's the most enjoyable to me. Mm-hmm. Some of the most negative, I guess, is actually dealing with a lot of the negativity that can surround and a lot of the emotion that can come through some of these public meetings. So that has been something that I think anybody would really kind of struggle with. You just try not to take it personally. Mm-hmm. And everybody has good intentions. Everybody wants the best for their neighborhood. And so you have to keep that at the forefront of your mind as well, and put yourself in their shoes and make sure that you truly believe in what you're proposing. Mm-hmm. At least for me, that's how I sleep at night, is to know that what I think, what I'm putting forward in front of everybody and in front of the city is truly what I think would be the best, highest and best use for mm-hmm. that property.
Yeah, and to think about the amount of time you spend on this, I mean, it really is like your baby, I mean, this is your thing, and it's probably easy for people to think, oh, these, big-time developers making all this money, all they want to do is make money, but in reality, you're building a physical structure that's going to be here for a long time to come. So I know you, so I know that you'd never want to just put something out there just to make money. This is a physical mark on this city that you're making, so you have to believe in it, and I know you do. And that's probably also the hard part when you do get that negativity, is just the difference in the reality of the situation and the perception, which, perception really is reality. So a lot of your job in those community meetings is changing the perception for them to really see. And it's probably why you brought those delicious cookies to the meeting too. Which
you gotta try and butter them up somehow, but
those helped.
But you're absolutely right. That was well said.
So what's the current state of that project that we've been talking about? What stage are you in right now?
So that stage is we've gotten through our initial due diligence, and now we're basically finishing up some of the concept stuff. We've engaged our architect, our civil engineer, our landscape architect, some other trades, mechanical engineering and plumbing, all of those guys to basically put together our plans, our concept, finalize that, and then that will be submitted to the municipality, and then we will take the next step, and they will schedule a public hearing for the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Do you have any kind of timeline on when you expect that next meeting to be?
It would probably be within the next 60 days.
Okay. What are some completed projects that you've worked on in the city?
So that's completed projects that I have worked on is 0.
Okay.
And that's because a development timeline literally takes, typically for some of the projects, the scale that we're doing, 3 to 5 to 7 years. So right now, the 7 single-family homes that we're doing here, that's actually a quicker one because it was already zoned and entitled for what we wanted to do. So that one will be delivering, I think the first units will be actually delivered in the next couple of months. Then we've got a couple of other ones in City of Denver that we had to go through a rezone process. The rezone took 18 months. We had a significant amount of time, energy, capital tied into that, and a lot of risk. So that we've started the vertical construction on the townhome piece, and those will be delivering this summer as well. There's another multifamily piece on that is not yet broken ground, and we're working through a couple of other modifications and improvements that we can make to that before we move forward. Aside from that, we've got a mixed-use building that is a similar concept to the site that we've been talking about here, where there's a ground floor warehouse office flex space with residential above. That will be completed in May of this year, so just a couple of months out. And then we've got another 31-unit apartment building in City of Inglewood, and that one should be completed, I think, in September if construction stays on track now. So we have those are all projects that I had initiated when I came on board.
Okay.
Other than that, stuff that was kind of under construction that I kind of walked into. One of our bigger, more notable developments is called the Villaggio with a V. As in Victor, and that's down off Dry Creek and I-25, and that's a big master plan community of about 1,000 units over approximately 60 acres. And so most of that was initiated in 2005, but we were finishing up some of the last phases when I first came on board, and so that was actually one of the first pieces that I was introduced to that had 36 kind of golf home villas and then 2 48-unit multifamily buildings. So those have been completed, and those are fully leased up now and sold. And you know, Peter and our company has been around for about almost 30 years. So throughout that time, they have developed and delivered over 3,000 residential units across the greater Denver metro area, ranging from all different product types: single-family homes, patio homes, townhomes, condos, some commercial stuff too.
Okay. So when would you so on something like this mixed-use property, you're going to have commercial space at the bottom, residential at the top, and they're actually going to be condos that you sell, correct?
Correct.
So then the commercial at the bottom is going to be leased out?
The commercial actually will be condominiumized as well. Okay.
So at what point do you step away from that? Are you in all the way until all the units are sold, or is there a point before that where you're done?
So yeah, we are definitely in it until every unit is sold. We're probably in it a little bit longer than that too. And in Colorado, I mean, we're inevitably in it longer than that due to some construction defect litigation, and the potential with that. So that's a whole nother discussion that we won't even broach here because that could take an entire episode. But yeah, we are in it until it is, fully sold out, or if it is a for rent project, we typically underwrite it so that we hold it for a 10-year period. And so, typically a product is stabilized after depending on the size and number of units, but you can predict stabilization within 24 to 36 months after delivery of the product. And so you'll then hold it for another 3, 5, 7 years after that. And all of that is market dependent, right? So if the market goes up, it's a great time to sell. We would potentially entertain selling it. Market's bad, we continue to hold on to it. And if rents are good, we'll definitely continue to hold on to it.
Okay. So what are some areas of the city or state that either you or MRA as a company see as having better than average growth over the next short term 3 to 10 years?
Ooh, that is the $1 million question.
Yeah.
I think the city of Inglewood, it has a great opportunity in front of itself. It's, right on the outskirts of Denver, and has been relatively unchanged for quite a while. So I think the city understands that and has embraced that, and that's part of why they have been so motivated to update their comprehensive plan and try and incorporate some opportunities for investment and development. I think Denver itself, the secret has kind of gotten out. We've seen exponential growth in the last 5 years. We've seen exponential units being delivered compared to historic numbers, and so Denver I don't think is going to go anywhere. I think it might level off a little bit, which is really the only thing that it can do. I don't think it can sustain the growth that it has. Yeah. But then a lot of the surrounding municipalities are going to be benefits of that, and they already have been. So Wheat Ridge, Lakewood, Golden, Arvada, Littleton, all to the west side of Denver. I think that's going to be a huge attraction. Aurora to the east, the Stapleton area, Brighton, some of that stuff, it becomes a little bit more affordable as you go to the east side of Denver. And then, north and south, you've got Boulder, you've got a lot of tech that's been coming into Boulder, Google's new campus there. So all of these things I think are pointing towards continued growth. It's just how much that has yet to be seen.
Yeah. So with that Inglewood comprehensive plan, you said that they're altering that currently. Is that also something that the neighborhood and the public can get involved with?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's strongly encouraged. So they will hold neighborhood meetings, outreach, where community members are encouraged to come, engage, find out what some of the master planners have been proposing, what they think would be the right thing, and then provide their feedback and comments. And most municipalities, I know Inglewood has been doing a very good job of trying to modify and incorporate those concerns from residents, neighbors, to make sure that context of their neighborhood, character of their neighborhood is not modified, changed significantly, that growth is going to be coming in the right places that can support it with traffic, with infrastructure that's in place. But yeah, they do have a lot of public outreach, and I would strongly encourage anybody to pay attention, go out, engage yourself with your community officials, representatives, try and learn more, and just become part of the discussion and have a positive impact, so that when a developer comes in to your neighborhood, to your area, you're just that much more aware as to whether or not what they're trying to do aligns with what the comprehensive plan was, what the vision was for your neighborhood going forward, and that'll just help give you a little bit more direction.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really intriguing to people these days. There's these swings in culture. And I know me growing up, I had a little bit different upbringing, moving around constantly, but we always just lived in whatever the new suburb was. It was the new build houses, and along with that, there was not a huge sense of community. So I think millennials in general have kind of missed out on that sense of community, and that's something that people are getting a lot more involved again, at least as far as I can see. So I'm going to make sure I find out more about these planning meetings, or finding out what I can do to stay more informed. So I'll also post some links as to where you can find out more information about that as well. We're running out of time here, but I wanted to see if you had any insider knowledge, or maybe just know, even if it's not insider knowledge, but as far as the plans for the light rail here in the Denver area, do you have any idea of where that's planning to be going next, or timelines or anything?
I honestly don't. Other than what has been already announced for some of the new lines that are coming out, I don't have any other additional knowledge or information as to where they're planning to expand that to. I think that it's long overdue, and yeah. I'm sure everybody does, and especially with the traffic impact that we've had here, any additional public transportation that we can get here in the Denver to alleviate some of that traffic will be long overdue. So yeah, don't have a good answer for you there.
Yeah, that's all right. It does seem like we are at least on the forefront here in America. I know I went to Germany and some different places in Europe back in, I think it was 2010 when I went, and I was just blown away with the public transportation, especially that they had in Berlin. I think that was the best system I had seen. I don't speak German at all, but I managed to find my way all around the city on that, and I just was so curious at that point in time of why don't we have this stuff, here in America, but seems like a lot of money's going into infrastructure now, and hopefully we start seeing that more widespread as well.
Yeah, and I think that politics play a huge part in that, and so I agree. I was very, very fortunate to be able to travel abroad a little bit, and I was very impressed with some of the public transportation infrastructure that they had. I think we're progressing that way, but technology, I think, is also going to be a huge disruption with traffic. So you have autonomous vehicles that are going to be coming online, and I think that is going to probably be one of the most revolutionary changes to the way that we live probably in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, that's going to be huge, man. That's another one that we could talk about for a long time. But when you think about the effects, I mean, not only on traffic, but on jobs, people that are semi-drivers or cab, Uber drivers, and how that's going to change, There's so much rhetoric in the media about the president creating jobs and this and that. But the big changer always is technologies and how those change and how we'll adjust to that. So speaking of the current administration, do you see anything in your industry changing due to that without getting into politics and preferences?
No, not really.
Business as usual. That's good. Business has been good.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yep. We're moving forward, heads down, staying positive.
Good. Me too. Me as well. So it seems like you've pretty well gotten to, a place that you had your mind set on since college, or maybe even before that. This is what you wanted to do. So you've been successful in that. But looking back, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Oh, man. I would actually tell myself not to take life so seriously.
Yeah.
I wish I would have traveled a little bit more. I wish I would have kind of put off jumping into the career game as soon as I did. And yeah, just life is short, and just be thankful every day for friends and family, and just try and slow down a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny. It's so accurate of not taking life so seriously, and you could even give that advice to even younger self. That's something that I always think of when you see these kids in elementary school, even and I was the same way, but I had a girlfriend and I just thought for sure we were getting married. I'm 12 years old and I'm like, no, I can't move away. I'm going to marry this girl. And you wish that you could tell these kids, like, don't take it so seriously. This is the fun time. But I have a feeling that even if you could tell your 20-year-old self that, you still, it'd be hard to take that advice. It always is.
Yep, it is.
Well, good, man. Well, we're just about out of time here, so I sure do appreciate you having you on, you coming in, and I think there's a lot more to talk about that we didn't talk about, so maybe you can come back in again sometime and we can continue some of these discussions.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. You did a great job.
And as far as getting in touch with Michael is a very busy guy, but you can find him on LinkedIn. It is Michael Warren, once again, Metropolitan Residential Advisors. As far as getting a hold of us, you can always go to transcendinglending.com, and we're also Mortgage and Laws on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook and LinkedIn as well, so you can get a hold of me. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Transcending Lending. For more episodes, subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, or visit our website at transcendinglending.com. Tune in next week for another great episode.